Good evening. My name is Mike Haney, and welcome to our special election night coverage or recap on 60 Minutes in Black America. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Good evening again. My name is Mike Haney, and thank you for joining us tonight as we talk about a recap on the elections. We decided that instead of doing this show on Tuesday, which is always the election day in November for general and presidential elections, midterm elections in this country, that we would do it the following day and still understand that there may be races in this country, given the way that we ballot now, that would not be complete, but at least we'd have a better sense of where the country stood in this most crucial election in maybe a century in America on the second day. And perhaps we should have done it on the third day. Maybe we should have waited till Saturday. Maybe we should wait a week from now because there are many polls. All the polls are closed, but there are many states that are still counting votes, like in Arizona. We're waiting for a significant vote count of early votes and mail-in ballots that may determine the fate of the governor's race down there. We believe we're in a position to call the U.S. Senate race down there. But that's an example of where we are as a country with some of the voting rights and some of the voting legislation which has been passed by states. In any event, we're ready tonight with a good, engaging conversation with some good, astute political, what I call activists and political observers. We've got one in the state of Florida that'll be joining us, one in the state of Massachusetts, and one in the great state of Maryland. They'll be joining us for this enlightening conversation that we hope that you get something out of, because politics isn't just local to our jurisdiction anymore. As we realize, Joe Biden has been touring certain strategic parts of the country where his popularity may be okay to encourage people to go out and vote in House of Representative races and U.S. Senate races, because he knows that his agenda as president is crucial to the state of those two houses of government, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, 2 weeks ago, the Republicans were looking for a landslide victory in the U.S. House of Representatives. Matter of fact, they were talking in excess of 35 seat gains. We know that they only had to gain from where we stood before, which was a 220 to 215 mix prior to yesterday's election, that they only had to gain 5 seats based on some of the retirements and some of the candidates that were in office that decided not to run. But it's been interesting the past 24 hours that the Republican Party didn't perform nationally in U.S. House races to what their expectations were. Now, they're still expected to take over the U.S. House, but maybe by a margin of only 3 votes versus what they had expected by close to 25 votes net. And in the Senate, I got to tell you, some real exciting things are happening in the Senate. We'll talk about a couple of the key races in the Senate, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, that are still hanging out there, races in Wisconsin that have kind of been decided, in Florida where we thought there may be some turn, and the real exciting race where the Democrats have picked up a seat in the state of Pennsylvania. So we've got a lot of interesting stuff happening, and what I'd like to do at this time is bring in our 3 political experts. Bring them in all at one time. No need in doing introductions. They are much a staple of this show as I am. There Beatrice goes, there Bev goes, and there Robert goes. Welcome this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Robert or Beatrice, we're going to let you two say thank you as well for letting me join you. Just kidding. Well, listen, I want to get started. And before we get into individual races, get your perspective on and reflection on just the season of this particular midterm. And Bev, I know that you've traveled extensively in support of candidates, to shore up from a Democratic perspective some of the concerns that we've had about their being reelected or electability. So why don't you give us a sense of what this particular midterm meant to America, and maybe you'll compare it to the midterms in, I believe, 2010 with the during the Obama era.
Um, you'll remember that on Sunday night, you asked each of us guests to say a yes or no answer on whether we thought we'd keep the House and the Senate. Let's say we, the Democrats. On the House, I had to give you an honest, I don't know, because we really didn't know. We had high hopes for the Democrats. And as you said at the beginning of the show, wow, we are really close. Maybe the Republicans win by 3 seats. Maybe there's a miracle and somehow we get closer to a tie, although three is pretty close. The Senate, the sources I have, I work with a group called Force Multiplier. They're number crunchers and fundraisers. According to them, we're not going to hear any results from California until Friday, Nevada until Saturday. Arizona, they think we'll keep. Nevada's a little more chancy. If we lose Nevada but keep Georgia, we'll still be at 50-50. If we manage to win Nevada, we'll be at 51. A net gain of one and an actual majority.
Wow. And we're going to drill down, Bev, into each of those exciting races, the components that led up to yesterday with each of those races. But, you have been educating us since last year with Force Multiplier as we are in our own individual states or jurisdictions, the importance of understanding national politics, national elections, supporting national politics and national elections. Like we should have been as interested in Florida and Val Demings and Marco
Absolutely.
Rubio as we were with Lasix and out there in Nevada, potentially winning. We should have been supporting Mandela Barnes against Ron Johnson, even though we're in Maryland, because the implications of a president that may have been elected by people in Maryland to being able to carry out his agenda if he did not have a House and a Senate that
Absolutely.
were favorable to his party. You've been educating about that to us all along. What happened with Obama when he didn't have that in his second term, Val, before I move on to Deirdre, so get ready for your perspective. What happened to Obama when he didn't have the House and the Senate during his term?
Well, I think you already know the answer to that. We got out in 2008. Okay, everybody and their mama. We should have gone out in 2010. Most of us were happy that Barack Obama was elected president. We figured we'd done the job. We stayed home. In 2010, the Tea Party was raring to go. They showed up at the polls. Democrats didn't. And I believe Obama's loss was 41 or 43 House seats. You cannot do much if you can't get anything through the House. In 2012, he won again. In 2014, we stayed home. He lost the Senate. Losing the Senate meant no matter where you were in America, if you wanted a democratically appointed Supreme Court justice, you weren't going to get it. If you wanted movement on justices at the federal level, you weren't going to get it. If there was any kind of legislation that was promulgated by Democrats, you weren't going to get it. That's the result of not having the House and or Senate with you.
Wow. So it's important that Joe Biden get out there, even though Joe Biden realized with his popularity waning, particularly relative to the economy, and some people aren't very happy about the support that we're giving Ukraine. Joe Biden was afraid to go out on the campaign trail, just as Donald Trump went strategically places for
Mhm.
Republicans that supported him on the campaign trail. So that was interesting. We'll get back there. But Beatrice, what's your take on the midterms and the Republican Party, which I believe that you are excited about that Republican Party? What's your take? Did the Republicans have a good night last night? And where do you see this country going after these midterms? I think she's still on mute. Okay. So I'll never be short of words. So while Miss Muckle is getting off of mute, and I gotta say, in watching, and Dietrich, just jump in whenever you've got that
Can you hear
sound
me?
issue. Yeah, we can hear you now. Go for it.
Oh, okay. So, just yes, I mean the Republican Party did okay, not as well as expected, but I'm just excited about the turnout um, of this midterm election. I think we made history. I think it was diversified. I think it was just, I think everyone, so many people showed up. So I'm really happy about that. I agree with a lot of things that Beverly said, and I've been listening to you prior to what you say, that we do have to pay attention to many things. I am in Florida. I don't. Florida has turned red in a lot of ways, or anticipating it's going to turn red, was purple. So I'm just excited. I'm excited about the whole diversity across the country. I'm excited about how we and you, Michael, are bringing education to, and you as well, Beverly, and also um, the Shell. I think it's very important that we educate people to vote the way they want, or for the things that they want, whether it's Democrat, Republic. And I think we saw that in so many different ways across this country.
Hey, you know what? I agree, and those are some excellent thoughts, Beatrice, particularly the participation. I think that this was one of the highest participatory elections midterm in a number of years. And on Sunday, when we had conversation, we talked about the fact that blacks and students need to get out and vote, and it looked as though they did. People realized the importance of it. And what I'm excited about until we delve deep into, and I really want to look at Marco Rubio and Val Demings at some point, and Beatrice, with your perspective on that race in Florida. But what was really interesting is that I think that what you saw on both fronts from Republican voters and from Democratic voters, they did not like the taste and the mood of this country. And that was refreshing. Of course, it wasn't the overwhelming. We still got the crazy Carrie Lakes, and we're going to be talking about her in a bit, that is already started that election fraud stuff, and her own people down there are elbowing her in the head because that's what she is, that's what she does. But we'll get to that. So Bob DeShiel is in the studio as well. And Bob, what's your take on this midterm as you look nationally at the climate and mood, and you do the comparable to Obama midterm, to Trump midterm? Trump's midterm changed to Democratic, which is why we carried that into the 2020 presidential election. So what are your thoughts, Bob, about this particular midterm across the country and maybe even in your own state?
Um, I think that what, as much as anything else, it shows that the so-called mainstream media picked the wrong horse. I think that mainstream media decided that to go with Donald Trump, and they lost. I think that when in 2008, I guess it was when Obama started, he had both houses, and when Bev said that we went to sleep and didn't come out, that's because nobody called us out. Obama shut it down. He didn't protect his flanks. He didn't keep the movement going. He had a movement, not just presidents. He had a movement, a worldwide movement. But he stopped the minute he got through the front door of the White House. And that's why he lost the House in 10, and that's why he ultimately lost the Senate. In fact, that's who's responsible for Donald Trump, in my opinion. Now, moving on to the rest of the nation, I think Fetterman's win in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was great for the so-called Democratic Party, as was Josh Shapiro's win in the governor's seat. I think that Mark Kelly will hold on in Arizona. I you know I
And
think
we're going to delve into that deeply. We're going to delve into that deeply, Bob, because I want to really understand the dynamics of each of those races, and we're going to wind up this show with the Herschel Walker, Raphael Warnock, and is a black candidate at any black candidate at any level good for us. I think that's what we ended our show on Sunday with. It was a eye-opening show. And the beauty of 60 Minutes in Black America, the special edition, is that this is a documentable conversation, just like the conversations we've had with an insurrectionist, Dan Cox, with a now Governor Wes Moore, and other candidates, Farika Wilson in Florida, who we expect to have conversation with soon, as well as Marco Rubio, is that it becomes historical documentation of conversations with these people and ourselves in terms of how we see things. But I want to delve right into a really feel good moment in this country. Two feel good moments when it comes to governorships, one in Bev State and one in Robert State of Maryland, where in Maryland, let's talk about Maryland first, where we elected only the third, one, two, three black governors elected. We didn't say appointed like they were in New York. They had one appointed in New York. Third elected black governor in these United States, the first elected black governor in the state of Maryland, Wes Moore. And Bob, what is the mood in the state of Maryland relative to his overwhelming victory? I think he won by almost 30 points against a self-proclaimed Trump supporter, election denier, Dan Cox. What is the mood in the state of Maryland?
most people thought that West was going to win, and most people thought that he was going to win at or above the margin of victory as it currently appears. So that didn't come as a surprise, but what people are jubilant. This is the first time that African Americans have had an opportunity to select the head of the ticket since Obama, and the fact that the so-called Republicans made it so easy by putting a Trumpster in the form of Dan Cox gave an opportunity for everybody to show that the media picked the wrong horse. That, as you said, Michael, at the beginning, it was refreshing to see that the majority of American people were really not as stupid as the media and Trump thought they were.
Right.
And that is refreshing. That is absolutely refreshing.
Well, Bob, and we'll go a little further, and I want to see if this race in Maryland has touched Massachusetts, as Massachusetts and its election of its governor, which we'll talk about next, has touched the country. And let's talk about Moore's victory in Maryland, because it was more of a crossover. I think the pushback was when you look at the numbers and delve into the numbers in the state, which essentially geographically may look very red, just like this country looks geographically red, but when you look at the demographics and populations on each coast of this country, California, New York, Chicago, the urban centers and populous urban centers make it such that this is more of a blue country than it is red, even if it's only by this much. But Wes Moore benefited from a lot of crossover. A lot of people that protested Donald Trump voted for Wes Moore. First of all, it appears as though they thought he was a very credible candidate against a candidate that they thought would make a state that, was a bit more comfortable. It's not quite where it needs to be, but it would have been a bit more uncomfortable with a Cox in office than a Moore. So Moore benefited, particularly in Western Maryland and on the Eastern Shore, which are typically red aspects of the state, from people of Republican Party that voted for him. So this was truly a message to Donald Trump regarding Dan Cox's candidacy and his endorsement. So, hey, did you guys in Florida, Beatrice, hear anything about the Westmore campaign, and what do you think about it? And I think, Beatrice, we got to get you unmuted. There you go. I think you're going. Are you good? No, we can't hear you yet. So while you unmute, just let it. We'll hear you when you unmute. Bev, what did you think about Westmore's victory?
I don't follow governor's races a lot. I tend more to follow national races, but I knew that Westmore was certainly a likely winner. I'm glad to hear that a black Democrat won Maryland's governorship.
Well, I guess you'll follow it, in 2028 and 2032 when he's on a trajectory and endorsed by Oprah to be the next president of these United States, right? So all of a sudden, because governors and U.S. senators typically are where the pool of potential presidential candidates come from, Donald Trump being a misnomer as I guess he was dropped from Mars somewhere. I don't know where he came from, but he didn't come from either of those two. But, I think that Wes Moore, to your point, Bev, that you've always educated us to, paying attention to politics on a more global basis in these countries, I think Wes Moore is one that we need to watch because he, first of all, is one of only three in the history of this country. And secondly, as we look to have another person of color occupy 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., Wes, is someone that comes immediately to many people's mind. So did we get Beatrice unmuted? And she's still muted. Promise you, Beatrice, that we're going to figure out your issue, and we're going to save plenty of time. So you figure that out. We're going to get back to you. But let's go to Massachusetts and Headley. Do you know about the Massachusetts governor and anything happening up there, Bev? What happened to Massachusetts with the governor of Massachusetts?
Well, as you know, Massachusetts is generally a Democratic state. We will have a Democratic run up and down the ballot, unless it happens to be a year when the Republican candidate is a very tall, handsome white male. Then we default. There was nobody to take that spot this time, and the Republican candidate was someone who'd been endorsed by Trump, who was funded by Peter Thiel, a crazy millionaire, and the person who's responsible for Gawker being bankrupted. He was too much for people. Maura Healey had already been the Attorney General of the Commonwealth for quite a few years. People were familiar with her. It was actually time for a woman to become governor, so it was pretty easy for her. There was not a lot of doubt about who would win the ticket.
Hey, well, when you look at, as we said with Wes Moore, Bev, when you look at the fact that she's also, in addition to being a woman, she is, I believe, the second only LGBTQ governor, declared governor in this country as well. So she came out and ran as a LGBTQ woman, and she is in a position as well to look at a trajectory to the White House. And so these are important races and important wins if you're a Democrat to our education that, we are looking in California, New York, Chicago, Florida, Louisiana. We have to look and be educated to what Deirdre said initially, educating ourselves to understand what's happening in Bev's state of Massachusetts and what's happening in Florida. So did we get Deirdre unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Hey, there you go. So let's step back to Maryland, Deirdre, because I know you told us when you were here before you spent time there. What did you think of the Democratic win by Wes Moore in Maryland?
I spoke about Wes Moore before. I always thought that he was going to win for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that I like about him is his strong stance on education. So I thought he was going to win, and I'm glad he did win. I'm happy to see especially African-American male in that position in Maryland. I think the way Maryland's set up, that's going to be good for him. It's going to be good for the state to have such a strong black male as one of their leaders. I think that can make a difference, just by having him there. And I'm just
Wow.
excited about his education, his stand on education, and the look of it all. The look of having a black male in the state of Maryland as the governor speaks volumes. It helps men like yourself. It helps men like Michelle. It just adds to it just adds to the platform. He's done a
And
great job.
I like to say that it adds to us all because to your point, because I think that you, when you were on the show before, you described as a Republican, and
Mhm.
you moved towards Republican tendencies, and we
Mhm.
talked about the fact that Westmore benefited from a lot of crossover because of the
Mhm.
pushback of the candidate he ran against, and then here you are endorsed. And maybe we're a country that's beginning to, and I think maybe this election cycle did a bit more than what we expected it to do in terms of raising our conscience about conversations and levels of comfort with each other, particularly relative to politics. So, maybe if there's any benefit of Donald Trump as he exits stage left, and hopefully stage left is the federal correctional system, that we can look at the fact that we have learned as people, regardless of party affiliation, that it comes down to what it is a person is about and how we have conversations. So let's transition to a state that had a very contentious gubernatorial race, and that was Georgia, between Stacey Abrams and Mr. Kemp, the incumbent Governor Kemp, who won by a significant margin. I was surprised at the significant margin. And so people feel, here's another situation where people felt that, I was in the state of Georgia 3 times during the course of the primaries and just before the general election, getting the feel of the people. A lot of African American people or black people they didn't feel as though Jeff Kemp was a bad governor, and they weren't unopposed to supporting him. And so, to that point, did Stacey Abrams get out the vote? May have gotten out the vote for Jeff Kemp as well in his support, because where we thought there was going to be a closer margin, I think he won with over 8%, closer to 8% victory, and his support was wide. So, Bob, what do you feel? What do you think about that? What do you think that maybe Stacey Abrams got the vote out for Jeff Kemp as well as, and maybe the point, as we've said, that we need to encourage people to vote regardless of where they vote, who they vote for, even if they don't vote for our candidate. But what do you think about this election in Georgia where Stacey Abrams basically spent the past 2 years, based on the numbers, didn't perform well at all?
Present a reason for change, and Kemp had established earlier on that he wasn't a diehard Trumpster. I mean, look, you can't analyze this election as though it was a typical Republican and Democratic issue.
Mhm.
You can't analyze it or understand it without taking into account the Trump effect. Where there was a Trump effect, they lost. Where there was no Trump effect, everybody did okay, because this is the only opportunity, Michael, where people had the real chance to vote for whoever they wanted. They didn't care what party they were,
Mhm.
right? They didn't have
Wow.
to declare. They could do that, and they did it in this case. The diehards, the MAGA Trumpers, and those folks who are out there, but they were never in the majority. They were never in the majority, and that's what this election proved, and that's why it's so refreshing to me.
Wow. So Beatrice, how about you? You have a situation in Georgia, matter of fact, where Ron
I'm in
DeSantis,
Florida.
yeah,
I'm in
in
Florida.
Florida. You have a situation in Florida with a Ron DeSantis who people are like, a little bit of a analogy between a Donald Trump. Then you have a Governor Kemp, right?
Mhm.
When you look at Governor Kemp, is he the type of Republican that you're comfortable with as a Republican and supporting and voting and having no issue with pushing that yes button for?
Well, I would have, it's hard for me to answer that question because I do not live in the state of Florida. I mean, the state of Georgia. However, I do feel that this election really not only knocked out Trumpsters, they also knocked out one-dimensional type people. Stacey Abrams, to me, is very tunnel vision, very one-dimensional, and I think that's why she lost against Kemp. And I think he's just been consistent, and he hasn't. You really haven't identified if he's a true Trumpster or not. We'll never probably identify it, and I think that that's what kept that seat in place. As far as here in Florida, DeSantis, DeSantis is human. I think that him and Trump are not hand in hand. They really go against one another. But DeSantis has, I think you mentioned this, Beverly, about the Cubans here in Florida, and how they identify. DeSantis won 62 out of 67 counties. DeSantis, and being here with him, I knew nothing about DeSantis a couple of years ago. You just heard about him here and there. You didn't hear good things. But then he humanized himself. He put out there his wife had cancer. That made a huge difference. That turned him around, his wife having cancer, and how, not that she had cancer, but how he handled it, how he handled COVID, how he really has kept Florida, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a lover of DeSantis or anyone else, but he really kept Florida free. He kept us flowing. He cares about education. He has reached out to bring resources into Florida to improve our education, to improve our work, because it is a retirement state, and it has worked. And I think he's effective more so from taking the bull by the horns, going back to his Cuban culture. And Cuban people or Hispanic people, or a lot of people that are here that fall up under that umbrella, can relate to him because they look at their men as leaders. And he has truly been a leader in the way that I think that they like. And they've been working on that vote for a long time.
Wow, that's interesting. And it probably didn't hurt the fact that there were two Republicans running because Chris is really a Republican, right? He's a closet
Yeah.
Republican that was the governor. He was the former governor of Florida as a Republican, and then he
Mhm.
transitioned to be a Democrat, ran for the U.S. House seat as a Democrat. So, he is kind of like doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up. So,
And he
so I think you
ran.
made a good analogy there.
And Chris ran every commercial. He ran on abortion rights, nothing else.
Right, right,
So
right, right,
he,
right. So he
again,
had
that
nothing,
I
no
go back
wider
to that.
vision.
Yeah, that tunnel vision is what hurts a lot of candidates, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
and,
we have
Bev, I wanted to get to you because
Yes.
I got pictures of you and Stacey Abrams, and I know you guys had some relationship, at least to a point of getting to take a picture with her. So what is your take on that race, and what happened to Stacey?
Well, I'm concerned about her being characterized as having tunnel vision. I don't know what her tunnel vision was. This is a woman who has a great deal of education,
Mhm.
a lot of experience in government and law. Um, she is very widely read, and I don't understand what her tunnel vision
Why didn't the people support
issue
her?
is.
Why didn't the people support
People
her?
did support her, and Kemp, first of all, has the power of incumbency.
Mhm.
He doesn't need to be an outright Trumpster because he managed to make sure that the state of Georgia had the Trump infrastructure. Alabama, not Alabama, Georgia is the state that said you can't give people water, or food when they're in line.
Hmm.
He was the Secretary of State. He made sure that there were certain, election laws in order to prevent people from coming out, and to some degree that worked. Now he
You're
does have.
not you're not saying you're not I'm not, do I need to equate you to what Kerry Lake is doing in Arizona, making excuses for
Oh,
why Stacey
absolutely,
Abrams lost? I mean it
absolutely not.
seems as though she got the vote out, but it seems as though black people, to what Bob said earlier, crossed over and voted for Kemp because they weren't unhappy with him.
Well, that's the power of the incumbency. If you
Hmm.
don't do anything wrong, people will vote for you. But at the same time, the election infrastructure in Georgia is in fact very gerrymandered and Republican oriented. And that's not an excuse. That's
But
the
they
way
voted
they
Democratic in the
did it.
2020 election because I think that that was what Trump's concern was, is that the Democrats carried the presidential race in 2020 because of Georgia, which turned, even by this thin margin, blue. So
Yes.
you can't have it both ways. What are you saying here,
Well,
Bev?
you can't have it both ways, especially if I'm telling the truth about the electoral infrastructure. It
But wasn't
is
it their
artificial.
Secretary of State that pushed back and now has potential indictments on Trump's former advisor, the mayor Giuliana,
Yes, he
because
did.
of his? So here you had a Republican state administration that kept up the integrity of that state election to the benefit of the Democrats. And I'm listening to you say something that seems kind of contradictory.
No, he is also the same Secretary of State who managed to push 800,000 Democrats off of the election rolls. You can do something right sometime, which doesn't mean that you do something right all the time or something wrong all the time.
Well, thank goodness he didn't find 37,000 people to give to Donald Trump, or was it 7,000 Donald was looking for from him, right? Yeah.
11,780.
So at least he had the integrity of telling Donald Trump, I can't find 11,000, but I did push 800,000 off of you to give you a chance to win. Is that what you're saying?
No, but Kemp does have Stacey Abrams to thank, and there are folks in other states
Oh,
where
why did you say that? Because you think that her get out the vote
her
was
get
of
out
significant help to him?
her get out the vote was significant help to every voter in Georgia.
I agree
And
with
and, I,
that.
and you know what? I like to stand corrected. I don't think that she has tunnel vision. I think Abrams is very intelligent, and I think I want to say that I'd rather go back to the message. If you're listening to the same message, or if your message is not resonating, then you do not get votes. And sometimes that message comes from the same old mindset or thought process that you have taken previously. Doesn't mean
Wow.
that you're unintelligent. It doesn't mean that you're not wonderful and you haven't done anything. It just means that sometimes you can't hear what you've always been listening to. It's
Wow.
I'm sure there will be plenty of analysis in the coming weeks and months about what exactly worked and what didn't work.
But
yeah.
I think the better thing, Bev, to what you go around the country doing with force multipliers, that we're able to have this civil, engaging conversation and educate people who may be in one place or the other to what happens in a national perspective, because it's important. The context of elections, regardless of where you are, is
Mhm.
important. Stacey Abrams had some, she lent to this country some strategies for getting out the vote that were significant so that a Westmore in Maryland or a Headley in Massachusetts were able to prevail. So Stacey Abrams, to your point, she just ran into a governor, which happens. You get someone that has done their job. Didn't you say Sunday, Bev, that there doesn't necessarily need to be a need for term limits, that the vote was the term limit that you get out? So she ran into a governor that was popular among the people, and
Mhm.
he prevailed. And it's just that simple. Would you say
Well,
that, Bev?
I would say that most states, in fact, do have term limits on their governors. This is this guy's first term.
Right, but
Usually
he
there's
could have been voted out. That he would have been limited to one term because he was
That's
lousy.
true.
Right?
You
But
know,
he wasn't. So
if you
that's a
don't
good
make
thing.
mistakes, then the power of the incumbency protects you.
Well,
You get
I'm gonna
higher.
pass by that if you don't make
Okay.
mistakes, because the only person that never made a mistake was my mama, and at
Okay.
least that's what she told me. She's never wrong, and I agree with her because she had the
Okay.
power of the belt. But we all make mistakes. I just
Mhm.
think that Jack Kemp has been acceptable to the people of Georgia, and I can't wait for us to circle back to Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock to talk about how maybe acceptable Herschel Walker is.
We'll
But
get
let's go
there.
to our final
We'll
governor
get
race. Let's go to the Arizona governor race. And these governor races are important. They're very important because this is, as we mentioned earlier, where our potential presidential candidates come from. Some of the mandates, some of the issues in these states carry over. in terms of best practices. We've seen that in Georgia. We've seen that in Florida. We saw that in New York State as well. So we've got Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs. And, this has been interesting because right now it is a deadlock. And I am waiting for numbers. I'm watching our in studio TV screen looking for an update because they told me a few minutes ago there would be a significant update in terms of the votes in this race, particularly right now. Katie Hobbs is holding on. I think she was up by 11,000 votes as of 30 minutes ago to Kari Lake, the TV personality, who is a Trump endorsed candidate. And the fact that this race is even close or that Katie Hobbs is even leading shows to what we said earlier, the mood of the country. The mood of the country for distasteful politics, the mood of the country for nasty Trump-endorsed candidates making their election denier. And what has happened of interest, you guys, since we've come on there this evening, is that Kari Lake has already begun to file proceedings about voter fraud in certain jurisdiction. And on the other hand, immediately afterwards, the Republican Secretary of State for Georgia, for Arizona, as well as for the counties, the two counties that she is filing potential voter fraud or voter irregularities, the Republicans that oversee that have come out in total disagreement and protest to her. But this is what Kari Lake and this is what Donald Trump do. So give us a perspective, and let's go back to Bob. I think you've probably been following Kari Lake, or Kari Lake, or you. What is your perspective on this race in Arizona?
Lake, Marjorie Greene, they're all the same. I mean, they're exactly the same. I mean, Kari Lake never met a lie she wouldn't tell. Uh, uh, and again, it's refreshing. I think Katie Hobbs ran the worst campaign I've ever seen.
Yeah, she didn't do too well.
50-50. I mean, the people who told her not to engage,
not to debate.
Yeah. But in spite of that, my faith in people is refreshed by the fact that they said, I don't care, you ran a terrible campaign, but I'm still not going to vote for the devil.
Hey, you know what? I absolutely agree with you. I think that it is a refreshing to see, and we said this at the top of the hour, that people, regardless, this is a total against Trump. People have come out. People are sick of it. People are tired of it. Republican, Democratic, Independent, and the fact that Katie Hobbs is even in it is a surprise to me. And I think it's a matter that people are just done with the rhetoric and tone of a Kari Lake. So Bev, what do you have to say about that?
I've got to say this. I think you're really overstating it when you say that people are tired of Trumpism. The fact is, we're looking at a few races, but there are more than 200 Trumpster election deniers that have won some House races and many races within states. Those people still manage to get elected, more than 200 of them. I can't call that a Trump.
And let's qualify that not during this particular election cycle,
Yes.
right?
Yes, during this particular election cycle. There are people who have won races at the state level.
Okay, so we're talking specific state levels, right?
But haven't we been talking about governors? Then those are
state level. You mean like state senators, state Congress people, or U.S. related Congress people?
Well, some of them are U.S. related Congress people.
Mm-hmm.
We might have gotten Lauren Boebert out, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is still in there.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of people who have kept their seats in Congress who are Trump deniers.
Right.
We're talking about seats that have changed hands, but in the Congress and in various state houses, particularly in seats of influence like Secretary of State, there are plenty of Trump deniers who won office. It's not like we've gone from hell to heaven. There are plenty of those devils that are out there waiting to do ill.
I absolutely agree with you, Bev. I think that that's a very true statement. However, to what our expectations were, worst case scenario, I think that we have a breath of fresh air to see when you look at a Westmore, you look at a Headley in Massachusetts, and you look at some of the other examples around this country, the fact that a Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin can run and run very well. But let's transition to the Senate races and let's stay in the state of Arizona. Let's talk Mark Kelly, the incumbent, the Democratic incumbent, who thought that that was challenged very greatly. And that's Mark on the left in the military jacket. And that is, I started to call him Bat Masterson, but that's Blake Masters, the Republican on the right. And right now, we're calling this a Mark Kelly victory. We're calling that the Democrats are going to hold on to the seat. So in one instance, in the same state, which shows that people aren't voting totally down ballot. And it'd be interesting to get Bev's take on this. But Beatrice, what do you think about this rate with Mark Kelly and Blake Masters, the Democrats winning a U.S. Senate seat here, but in terms of the governor's seat, potentially you've got a Republican taking over there?
I don't have a lot to say about it. I do find it interesting that you have Kelly and then you have Lake. That's going to be very interesting. So that's going to be a to be determined as far as my thoughts on it.
But I think what it also tells us is that people aren't just voting down ballot party line, that they're stopping. And I think when we get to Georgia's Senate race, we'll see this as well. People are thinking through exactly what it is they're voting. And Bev, I know you've got something to say about that. What do you think about the fact that people are voting on one hand for a governor, potentially Kari Lake, and on the other hand, a U.S. senator, they're comfortable with Mark Kelly? Or is this part of that incumbent influence that you were talking about earlier?
Well, Kari Lake is still behind by 11,000 votes as we're speaking. So it's not that necessarily people went from one side of the ticket to the other. She isn't the winner yet. And Kari Lake has the power of being a public personality. In America, we are very superficial about who we vote for. We tend to vote for the person whose name we know. So if you see someone on TV all the time dressed up and talking as if they know things, you vote for that person because you know who they are.
Is that how Donald Trump won?
That's exactly how Donald Trump won. There were 17 Republican candidates in the primaries. If you've got 17 candidates on a ballot and you don't know like 12 of them, you're going to vote for the name you know. So that is one of the reasons that Donald Trump won. Republicans should have gotten among themselves and said, okay, everybody out except 3 of us. Let's keep 3 of us in, and then we're really going to dilute the vote that Donald Trump gets. You have 17 people in a primary, he's always going to win.
Wow. I see one of our viewers say that she's now behind 13,000. I got to tell you, that's a race that, we find intriguing, and we won't be sad to see Kari Lake go back to her TV show. Any other comments relative to that at all? Let's move to the Wisconsin Senate race where we have Mandela Barnes against Ron Johnson, a power figure. Ron Johnson on the left-hand side, the incumbent, against the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes, and Mandela gave him a fight, but the projected winner, the incumbent, Ron Johnson, in this case. Any comments to this race? Beatrice, Bob, any comment?
No, I thought Ron Johnson would win just because
Are you comfortable with Ron Johnson? Is he your type of Republican? Would you have voted for him if you were in the state of Wisconsin?
I wouldn't be in the state of Wisconsin, but this is a hard one. I would say no to your direct question, but it was obvious that he was going to win. In my opinion.
You think it was obvious? I mean, I think that Nelson. It's like 20,000 vote separation. It was like 49 to 48 or something like that. Pretty close race. I mean, I think Mandela ran a good race, and we're wondering Obama campaigned for him. I think Biden went out there and campaigned for him. And Wisconsin is traditionally what? Is it traditionally a red state, Bev?
It's traditionally in the middle.
Mhm.
One of those
The
quirky purple type
it's
states,
it's
or
however, it is also a very heavily gerrymandered state. And if you want to know why I'm saying Gary instead of Jerry, it's because the term is actually named after a person whose name was Gary. My husband says, "Stop explaining that to people. They'll think you're a nerd," which I am. Barnes obviously already won statewide. He's lieutenant governor. And he lost by a very small percentage, 1%. But his problem was that in 20 and 21, when we were having protests in the cities, Barnes was pictured as not being friendly toward the police, and a lot of negative advertising showed that. It really it really harped on those pictures of him looking as if he opposed the police. Now, if you're the lieutenant governor in a state, you're probably pretty supportive of law enforcement, and people should know that. But Republicans know that immigration and crime are two of the issues that will run people toward the polls, and they really used that against Barnes. It was
wow.
something that was not in his favor. It's always difficult for a person of color to win statewide in a midwestern state.
So
So
it's interesting you say
that's
that, Bev.
exactly well.
That's a heck of a perspective, Bev, and it's interesting you say that because some people feel as though, maybe if his name was Bob Barnes, he would have had a better chance that the name Mandela. This is what people say. They say all sorts of crazy things. That Mandela, that it may not have served purposes well in the state of Wisconsin. Bob, any thoughts about that race, Bob?
Ran a good race, but he ran right into the core. He ran right against the core foundation of the MAGA unit. He ran right. He took it head on, and he almost pulled it off. I mean, we're not going to win every time. You're not going to win every time you out of the gate.
That's
But
real.
he almost pulled it off, and and we could have won. You hadn't gotten to this yet, but I don't know if you're going to talk about what happened in Ohio. But that was one that the so-called Democrats really let that one get away.
Right.
They
Yeah.
didn't. They didn't
We'll talk
avoid
about
anything.
Ohio if you want it. We've got time. And I see a message, Bev. Keep being a nerd. You're a great political analyst. So what was that message up there for Bev? I learned a lot from you about politics. So someone
Thank
really
you.
appreciates that. That's it. You're in the
Keep
wrong
listening.
business. And then there was a message up there before about we could play that message from Quandra. It's a beautiful thing to see so many African Americans running for political offices. I agree. That may be qualified in a position to really be influential and help in so many states during this midterm. I absolutely agree, and I wonder what the opportunity is for Mandela Barnes because I personally think that he ran a good, credible, hard-fought race, and hopefully something's in his future. But let's transition down to the state of Florida, right? And let's talk about Val Demings. When we talk about disappointment in a race for someone that spent a significant amount of money and was essentially trounced, right? What's your perspective on that, Beatrice? You're down there. Did you vote for Val Demings because she's a African American female?
How dare you ask me how I voted? No.
You know what? That was probably not a good question. So let me ask you another one. Did you vote for Val Demings?
No.
Okay. Figured you'd answer it that way. So, so what happened down there in Florida? I mean, I was pumped up about Val. I thought that Val was credible, former chief of police of Orlando, was one of the House impeachment managers in the U.S. House of Representatives. What did she do wrong? I mean, what was up with her campaign?
I don't think she really did. very hard to say. I don't think she did anything wrong. I think that she just fell outside of the environment of where Florida is right now. I think that her and Mark, she didn't do anything wrong. Her message was, all we really heard about her. We all knew she had a lot of money behind her, but she really wasn't out there. She really didn't seem to promote herself other than to let us know. I think that her police background came out. She seemed very assertive and very matter of fact that of who she was and the family she came back. She just, she's a hard worker. And I think, and I hate to say it like this, but she wasn't saying a whole lot, but she was roaring a lot. She was seeing it just really, she wasn't, as much money she had, her messages on the screen, her commercials really didn't resonate. All her messages were saying that her mother was her maid and her father was a janitor and she knows hard work, and then she would say that she was the chief of police. I don't think she gave.
So what are you saying, that if people wanted if people wanted a maid or a janitor, they would have voted for someone else, but they didn't want a maid or a janitor traits for the U.S. senator? Is that kind of what you're alluding to? That she?
No, I'm alluding to she didn't give us the future. She gave us the past.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, she gave us.
And is this an example where Marco Rubio, to what Bev said earlier, or what we talked about earlier with Kemp, hasn't done a bad job? I mean, and people, it seemed as though of color, or black people down there, don't widely criticize them. What do you think? What do you see down there?
He's quiet. Who's Marco Rubio? He's quiet. He stays under the rock until someone, pulls a string that tells him to come out and tells him what to do. And he's set up, he has something great going with Frederica. He told her what she wanted to hear. So
right.
She's, they together, discussing how, African Americans are being affected. And that's probably all he's done, but we don't really hear about Marco Rubio.
Well, it's interesting you say that. It's interesting you say that because he's committed to coming on 60 Minutes in Black America in the wintertime in January. He couldn't come on. You're right about he and Frederica, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. They sponsored. He sponsored in the Senate. She sponsored in the House, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House. Legislation on a commission to study the policies that went against black men and black boys, specifically black men and black boys. Marco Rubio sponsored that in the U.S. Senate, and he also sponsored similar legislation when he was Speaker of the House for Florida as well. He just realizes he needs to service all the people, which you hope your politicians realize, or to your point, may be so quiet that he stays underneath the radar. But I was just amazed that Val Demings just didn't do that well. So let's transition to anyone else have any thoughts about that, Bev? Any thoughts about
Of course I do.
Val?
I always have thoughts about everything. Val Demings is a black woman running in a red state.
Yes.
That's all you have to say. She's a black woman running statewide in a red state. In Force Multiplier, we support candidates who are on the bubble. Everybody loved Val Demings, but she wasn't on the bubble. She was able to raise a lot of money by herself, didn't need any help from us. And we said, look, she is a black woman running statewide in a red state. She doesn't have a chance, no matter how good she is.
So is Florida really a red state? Is Florida really a red state? I mean, I don't think Florida's a red. I think it's purple. And, this is a state where Ron DeSantis only won the governor house by less than 2,000 votes against a black man. And so I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. And then you have so many transients in Florida that come from everywhere. But so how do you define as a red state?
Well, first of all, they
love you, Miss Beverly. They love you. I think you need your own show.
I'm glad. Well, they put DeSantis back in office. That's one thing. This man has done nothing but thwart anything that the White House has wanted to do. He was ridiculous on COVID. He let all the teenagers and college students come to spring break. You got a huge outbreak of COVID in the state. And he was pandering to the people who wanted to say, let's open everything because they're worried about
Were
business.
you okay with that, Beatrice? Were you okay with the
Oh,
fact
yes.
that Florida was open and that DeSantis did not keep people hemmed up like they did in New York and Maryland? Were you good
Yes.
with that? Did you support that?
Well, it wasn't exactly like that. That we did, we just like we were free to be, and we did take precautions. And one thing he did, he stopped everyone coming here on 95. If you flew in here, he would put you somewhere else. He did protect us from, and yes, we did have an outbreak, and yes, he did let some spring breakers come. However, we survived it, and our economy is growing. And you know what? Many people didn't skip a beat. If you come down here to the stores, he did put regulations and policies in place to where I've been to New York, I've been to Maryland. You come down here, everything is separated even now, to the point where, it's so wide and everyone still stays apart from one another. So he did things in a way that seemed crazy to the rest of the world, but
I like that.
living here, we dealt with a issue. We didn't have all the solutions, and we took step by step. He put many things in place, from price gouging. A lot of things that were happening in other states were not happening here. Hence why we had to close down 95. We had to close from people from coming here we had to close down airports from people from coming here because we were free. Does that mean that we all were on top of each other and partying and restaurants were really open the way people made it seem? No. You could not get into most apartment buildings without you couldn't even if someone lived there. It was almost like how hospitals were in New York. And but go ahead.
I'm keeping this image in front of me of DeSantis about to address some audience. There are kids behind him wearing masks, and he tells one of the kids, "Take off that mask." Mm-hmm. Using your authority to do something that is in fact contrary to public health regulations, I don't see that as being helpful. And I do have the image of thousands of teenagers and college students descending upon Florida, maskless in throngs. And if you survived COVID, then you survived it. But if you didn't survive it, then you died. And part of that came from being in Florida,
and New York,
that had so few restrictions.
Right, and I understand that completely. And I have to say to you that it wasn't DeSantis telling us to take off our mask. It was people making their own personal decisions, because we are free here in Florida, and you still have people that wear masks and you have people who don't. And that is a personal decision. It's up to a person who, if they want to live or die, to make their own decisions. It's not up to government. It's not up to anyone else. And I do remember that, and I did not agree with him telling someone to do something. But generally, I think he governed the way the state was moving. He took the actions because we were not, in the beginning, it wasn't well. There were all sorts of horrible things that happened here, but the people who did want to wear masks and the people who own businesses that did want to allow people to come in, they had signs. You had to have signage and everything. And to me, I liked it. Did it mean that I wanted to be around people who didn't wear a mask or who wore a mask? It was my personal decision to be or not to be. And
that is amazing that we transitioned from Demings to potentially the presidential nominee in 2024. And, there was a comment up before, Jonathan. Let's read that comment about Rubio. And then we got to remember that Rubio ran for president as well against Trump, and he and Trump weren't very good close friends. Unfortunately, Cuban immigrants like Rubio and his family will never get over the fact that the wealthy exploiters of the Cuban people, supported by the U.S. government, were ousted by the revolution. Supporting such as Rubio is tantamount to opposing the radical Republicans' program of dividing up formerly rebel land amongst the freed persons in the immediate post-Civil War era. think how differently our history would have been. That's compelling. And you know, this is 60 Minutes in Black America Special Elections Edition. We talked about the fact that this is a documentable conversation. We have Robert DeShield, Beverly Cooper Wheely down here at the bottom, Beatrice Muckle at the top, that we get an opportunity to look at comments as Jonathan points that Jonathan raised, as well as this conversation that takes us all around the nation because we're all affected by the politics in Florida and Maryland, in Maryland and Florida, in Alabama and Georgia, in California and New York, because that's where we are as a country, and particularly the mood, and especially if we travel to these jurisdictions. So it's important for us to have these conversations. We're doing this election recap. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on Facebook, please like us. Let us know you like us. Continue to put comments in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. But we said that this recap was coming on a Wednesday, the day after the official election on Tuesday, because there was a need for us to fully realize where the results were. And to many, we still don't know. We still don't know what the results will be. And to Bev's point, there are some results that we won't realize. And I think you mentioned Nevada until Saturday. But let's transition to Nevada. Let's talk about Nevada. I like your tie, Mike. Okay, Quandra, I'll make sure that we mail that to you. I appreciate that. But let's talk about Adam Laxalt and then the Democratic incumbent there, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Bev, do you want to talk about this at all?
Now, how did you know I would want to?
Well, Bev, I just know that you will talk about it first as usual, lead us in the conversation, and then we're going to ask Robert to give us some follow-up on that. But this is a crucial race. If this incumbent, Democratic incumbent, and Nevada is one of those quirky states, isn't it, Bev?
I don't know what you mean when you say quirky. Nevada can be both, and it can be somewhat red, it can be somewhat blue, mostly blue. Now, Catherine Cortez Masto is the incumbent. She's running against someone named Adam Laxalt. And if that name is familiar to you, it's because Adam Laxalt is a legacy candidate. His dad or granddad, I don't know everything, was Pete Domenici, who was a governor of New Mexico. And his father or grandfather was Paul Laxalt, who was a governor of Arizona. So it's not that this guy is coming with a lot of credentials of his own. He is someone who has been in the state legislature, but he also has a famous name. People have heard of him. He doesn't have to be someone who's done a lot or proven his bona fides against Cortez Masto. You know, she has done a wonderful job, but Nevada is a state that can go either way. Fortunately for her.
So, Val, are you saying that name recognition is what has carried him to a point of being in actually the lead at this point out there? Are you saying it's name recognition, the same thing you mentioned with Kerry Lake? So you're saying that name recognition of him has outweighed a sitting incumbent. I don't know if I believe that.
Americans are kind of lazy when it comes to politics. They don't do the kind of homework that I'd like to see them do. And unfortunately, they often vote for the person whose name they know, which is how so many celebrities who have absolutely no business running for office believe that they're capable of doing so. Now, fortunately for Catherine Cortez Masto, the majority of the votes that haven't been counted yet are coming from places like Las Vegas. Las Vegas, the entertainment capital, is heavily unionized and blue. So when those votes get counted, they are more likely to accrue to her than they are to Laxalt. We'll, as my number crunching sources say, we won't know until Saturday. Right now, he has the lead, but the momentum could be with her. Wow.
Any other thoughts, Bob, Beatrice, on this race, this crucial race? What happens if we lose this seat? And I said to myself, don't say we. Just as the Democrats lose this seat, what happens? Because this is an incumbent seat. Are they planning to lose this seat? Is this a surprise?
It wouldn't be a surprise. It's as we said, she's someone who's been on the bubble. It was definitely a possibility for a lot of reasons. If they lose this seat right now, it's definitely at 48-48. We plan, we presume that we're going to get both Arizona and Georgia, which will keep us at the 50-50 tie we have. If we win Masto, then we're at 51. We have an actual majority.
But
But this one, this
but
one
we're not
remains to be
counting
seen.
on, you're not counting on Nevada turning stained blue. Doesn't
Not
look it
counting on it, but
doesn't look good. Doesn't look
but
good.
well, considering where the votes that have been counted are coming from, she could prevail.
Wow. Okay,
It's
great.
not only
Hey,
how many votes you have, it's where they come from. And if they come from
absolutely.
Las Vegas, which is heavily union, they're going to be voting for her.
Absolutely. So any other thoughts, Beatrice, Bob, any thoughts on this?
Um, my thoughts are that elections are about personalities, and um, Val didn't win in Florida, and Stacey didn't win in Georgia because they didn't identify anything wrong enough with either Kemp or Rubio to make people angry enough to vote against them. That's just the bottom line. And again, I think we do a disservice to the public to the extent that we keep promoting this notion that the voters voted based upon what party people belong to. Voters voted based upon who they liked. Elections don't select the best people. They just are a way of selecting the winner.
So you agree with what Bev just said about Laxett and his family background and the fact that he has name recognition out there, and he's held elected office before. She said so his name recognition is more prominent than what she may have actually done as a sitting U.S. senator. So we're saying people don't vote on record; they vote on name recognition. Is that what you're saying, Bob?
Bev is absolutely right. People spend more
Yes,
time picking the brand of toilet paper than they do thinking about who to vote for.
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Wow, wow. I'm not even going to get into a double single ply toilet paper with that conversation. Because, we could do a lot of wiping with some of these elections. And, we definitely want double ply with Georgia, which we'll get to. We're down to our last two. I want to talk about Pennsylvania. And here's one that kind of defies what you guys were saying, and that's Mehmet Oz, right? Total name recognition was the Oprah factor in play here, and that's the reason why he lost because Oprah came out and endorsed John Fetterman, who many people were ecstatic for many of the right reasons to see when we know that John Fetterman, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, former mayor of Scranton or one of those cities up there, underwent serious surgery, and there was questions as to whether he could do the job, and he ultimately prevailed. Bob, your thoughts about this race and Dr. Oz, the Wizard of Oz?
Oz was a transplant. He really is not. He's not. He was not a Pennsylvania. He's really not a Pennsylvanian. He's from New Jersey, and I think Oprah nailed him. Oprah nailed him, threw him under the bus, nailed him. In fact, and without Oprah, I don't think Fetterman would have pulled this out. Frankly, as we were going through all of this, I tried to remember: is there a black Dr. Phil that Oprah promoted? Is there a black Dr. Oz that Oprah promoted? And I couldn't think of one, but that's a different story. But I digress.
Good comment.
I digress.
Wow, wow. So you're saying that it was the Oprah factor because Oprah also endorsed Wes Moore, right? And that Wes Moore endorsement was
But he
probably
didn't.
significant, although the circumstances were different.
Yeah, it was helpful, but he didn't need it. He could
Right,
have won
exactly.
without Oprah's endorsement.
But you're saying John Fetterman absolutely benefited from Oprah not necessarily endorsing him, but not endorsing someone that she made a multimillionaire.
She did endorse Fetterman. She
No,
said she looked.
but she didn't endorse Oz, who she made a multimillionaire. I mean, he was a guy that was part of her network, and she came out and said, "Oh shucks, I can't endorse this guy, even though I made him tens of millions of dollars. Get me some Charmin. Let's wipe this guy off the plane." But to your point about people thinking more about toilet paper, Charmin, please, absolutely get Oz out of here. And was Oz the type of person that Pennsylvania wanted to represent? And Pennsylvania, Bev, is that one of those quirky states too, like Wisconsin and Nevada? What do you think about this race?
Pennsylvania is a divided state. To the east, it's urban. You could call it East Coast. It's Democratic and blue. The rural parts of the state out west are red. Those are working class people. John Fetterman really can appeal to both. First of all, he's just a huge personality. He's 6'8". He wears a cowboy hat and hoodies. He's quirky. He's got a brand. I see you shaking your head, right? Americans are superficial. They vote for brands. Now it happens that Fetterman has a lot of weight behind him. He's lieutenant governor. He has been a mayor. He has been very effective in a small urban area. He's got bona fides. There's a reason to vote for him. Oz had a lot of name recognition. I really don't know what would have happened had Oprah not come out against him. Something about Oprah, she's not a politician. She's not necessarily a deep thinker. She is an entertainer. She endorses people on her show because they are entertaining. Now, Mehmet Oz may be a doctor, but he's an entertaining doctor. He's a TV doctor. And those aren't enough credentials for you to have a seat in the Senate.
Wow. So Oprah, who people were thinking of in 2016 and potentially asking to run for president, right? She's not a politician. Is that
That's
what you
silly.
said?
That is silly.
It's silly for what?
It
Silly
is
for us to consider her running for president?
absolutely.
Was it
Because
silly for us to consider having Trump run for president? So
it
there's two
was it
silly
was
moments there.
it was
What
worse
about
than
Ronald
silly.
Reagan? What about Ronald Reagan?
That
Was
was
he in that
also
same
silly
light?
because
But two of those were elected.
what you're doing is that you are in fact naming people who had name recognition prior to their being in office. That's how they got in office because people knew who they were. Think of the folks that we've said, oh, they should run. Oprah should run for president. Matthew McConaughey should run for president. These are people who are entertainers. When did we start mistaking entertainment for like political ability
Well,
or
and you have
ability
a
to
point there,
Mhm.
Bev, but I think many times people look at the philosophical basis. I mean, like a guy like Denzel, that's an actor, but also a very well spoken and thoughtful human being that you would like to represent you in some form or fashion because of maybe his compassion. You look at General Colin Powell, who was a military guy. You look at a Roosevelt, one of the Roosevelts. So it's not as though they don't come from different backgrounds. I mean, I heard people mention Michelle Obama because of her astuteness and her educational background could potentially be a great presidential candidate. So it's not out of the realm that we don't look for leadership in that direction, right? I
It's
mean,
not out of
look at President Carter, right? One-term President Carter, he was a peanut farmer, and that probably was a major mistake,
well,
looking for a peanut farmer to run the country.
he wasn't just a peanut farmer. You recall he had been in the military for a long time. He had a high rank on a nuclear either ship or
Yeah, he
submarine.
was out of the U.S.
And,
Naval Academy, right? And he
and
also was the governor of Georgia.
U.S. and the governor of Georgia.
Yeah, and my
He
mother loves him, so I probably shouldn't have commented to
well,
that, but
you can say that. The fact is, from 76 to 80, we had a very bad deal, including the Iran crisis, which is what unfortunately blew his presidency.
wow. Hey,
He
so we're in
wasn't
Georgia. We're down to the last moments of the show. Let's stay in Georgia. Let's stay in
okay.
Georgia and let's go to what is really going to decide from a Senate perspective The Senate race, the power in the Senate of the Democrats holding or losing comes down to Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. Herschel on the left in the red tie, and Raphael in the blue tie on the right. And right now, it's almost a dead heat. I think Warnock is up like 22,000 votes or something of that nature. I'm sure one of the viewers will send me a note on that. But in Georgia, if you don't get 50%, then it automatically goes to a runoff, which it appears as though, and I think the Secretary of State has already made comment to there being a runoff on December 6th of this year, and the two campaigns immediately begun campaigning again yesterday evening when they knew that this was heading there. But let me get your thoughts. Let's go with you, Beatrice, first. Your thoughts about this race. And Beatrice, do you support Walker? Would you vote for him if you were in the state of Georgia? And I know you're not in the state of Georgia. I know you probably wouldn't live there, but it's right next door to Florida. Would you vote for Herschel Walker as a Republican?
It's not if I would vote for him. It's if, he's going to get in by votes.
Well, he's hung in there. I mean,
He's
he's at a virtual tie with a Baptist preacher. I mean, how much can you not equate credibility when you're able to be on par with a Baptist preacher from Martin Luther King's church? I mean, so there's something said about
he's
his
a pawn.
integrity.
He's a pawn. I mean, it's almost like a country star getting all of the votes from all their country
Yes.
community. So he's a pawn. And this is a race that, I really unfortunately feel that this Herschel may come across this fence, because with this rerun, that's going to put more power into whoever's behind him.
Wow.
Whoever's
So you're
pulling the
saying
strings.
to me that you believe that this rerun gives Herschel the leg up?
Yeah, because
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I
it's
see
going to
that.
be a push that people are going to be told what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Just like with Herschel, if he's being told what to do, how to do it, and being put in this position as a
I know
pawn, there's a reason.
Ted Cruz has
Yeah.
already been there. Ted Cruz out of Texas was there today because they've already started campaigning. But I understand what you're saying, and I agree that even though that Herschel did not realize from Kemp, if you look at the votes that Kemp got as the Republican governor
Mhm.
winner and incumbent, and you look at what Herschel got, I think they said it was like 150, 200,000 vote difference in what Kemp got as a total Republican vote to what Herschel got, or Herschel lost votes, but he didn't lose enough votes where Raphael was declared the winner. What do you think, Bob? What's your thoughts about this, Bob?
If Warnock runs in the runoff election, the same campaign that he has run up to this point, he's going to lose. He has to
Wow.
engage. He has to
Mhm.
engage. He has to tell people why they should not vote for Herschel Walker. He has to tell people Herschel Walker is just not smart enough to be United States Senator.
Mhm.
And he has to have the courage to say that. And if he won't engage, if he keeps playing Mr. Nice Guy, I'm above it all, he's going to lose.
Mhm.
Well, I think that Reverend Warnock seemed to take the high road and not criticizing and saying things detrimental to Herschel, or he was afraid of his own background when it came to some of the relationships and how things were settled with his wife and what Herschel brought up in the debate relative to the church kicking out people and evicting people. Maybe he didn't want to get into that mudslinging, but I agree that they have to engage each other. So, Bob?
Well,
It's not mudslinging. I didn't say a thing about Herschel's personal life. I said
Mhm.
about his capability. If
Facts.
we're if
Yeah.
we're trying to elect somebody to run a spaceship and you're a carpenter, I got a right to tell people, hey, you don't know how to run a spaceship. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean
Well,
you're an
he
evil person.
Herschel to Herschel's credit, Herschel is a multimillionaire. Not that he wasn't set up in business, but he's got a couple chicken boxes, and he sells. He has a brand. Bob, why are you laughing there? But the point of it is that that's what he says, and I got to tell you, we said earlier, or someone said earlier about how blacks normally affiliate more with the Republican Party. At least they did at the turn of the century. I see you shaking your head, Bev. Believe me, that's why I waited for you for
Oh,
last. I'm gonna give you the
okay.
last word. Okay,
Okay.
that the Republican Party was the party of black people because do we necessarily agree with as a whole with some of the modern or progressive philosophies out here, be it from same-sex marriage to abortion rights, et cetera, et cetera. There are people that voted for Herschel in numbers because of how he aligned. Where I think people's discomfort seems to be is the fact that Donald Trump has endorsed him, and I think that's going to cost Herschel in the end. Bev, let's go to you. We're at our last couple of minutes, so we'll let you go to the Herschel and
Okay.
Raphael analysis, and then give us your final remarks before we
Now,
go to Bob and go to Beatrice for their
okay,
final remarks.
you know how I feel about Herschel, which is I too have little care for what he did in his personal life, except that on a public stage he's lied about it so much. Herschel is another carpetbagger. He lived in Texas. The Republicans had him move to Georgia so that they could put him up for election.
But
Now,
didn't he play football for the University of Georgia? He is always a Georgian to them.
and for that reason, that's why they put him up. Here's an intelligent, educated black man. The Republicans understand they can't put anybody up
Who's the
against
educated, intelligent black
uh,
now?
Yeah.
Raphael Warnock.
Oh,
He
I
can
thought you were
say,
talking about Herschel
no,
Walker. Okay.
no, not
Because
not
you
ever,
got two of them here.
not ever. But they know that the only person they could put
Are
up
you
that could
throwing the
challenge.
baby out with the bathwater here, Bev?
Let me finish. What I'm saying is that the Republicans know the only person they could put up against a black man is another black man. So they went fishing. They caught, I don't know what they were looking for, but they got Herschel. They brought him into the state from Texas simply because he was a football star. Now, there are some people who are going to vote for him because he was a football star. As Jidra said, there are other people who are saying, well, I want the Republicans to be in control of Congress. So no matter how much of an idiot I think he is, I'm going to vote for him so that ultimately we give the Republicans that power. If you are in Georgia, whether you're black, white, or other, you should be offended beyond speech that a Republican would put up this person and say, here's who we chose because we want to be in power. We need you to vote for him. I mean, that's offensive. You're muted, Michael.
It's been a great discussion. We're in the last 2 minutes, and I'd like to give each of you 30 seconds to kind of give your perspective of what the next year looks like after this midterm and who wins the Herschel Warnock showdown December 6th. Beatrice, you want to go first? 30 seconds.
Oh, I agree with Beverly. I think she's so right about Herschel Walker as she was with everyone else. He has name recognition. He was planted there just like Oz was planted there. This is, difference between playing checkers and chess. And this is what they do. So I do think he's going to cross that finish line because I think they're going to realign. As far as what's coming up, I'm looking at I know we're going to talk about the presidential elections for 2024. Of course, we know DeSantis is going to be there. I'm just curious to see, who else we think is going to be trying to become president in 2024. I have DeSantis. I have a couple of people. I have Ted Cruz, of course. I also have Kamala Harris. I have Elizabeth Warren. I have Roy Cooper. So I just wanted to see everyone's opinion on what we should look forward to.
Might I
Well,
say
it
one thing?
sounds like another show as we get closer because now that you've got Headley and Mass and Moore in Maryland, maybe you get some gubernatorial candidates that are of color and other significance as well. Bob, 30 seconds.
He has to give the people, he has to tell them why they should not, cannot, and do not really like Herschel Walker. Not because he didn't graduate as valedictorian, but because he lied about having graduated as valedictorian. Not because he didn't graduate in the top 1% of his class at Georgia, but because he lied about graduating altogether. He has to be willing to engage and tell people that. Do you want to vote for a liar? If so, he's your guy.
Who's going to win that race, Bob?
Raphael, if he engages.
Okay.
He'll lose.
Bev, you get your 30 seconds.
Well, my 30 seconds is, first of all, Vice President Harris will appreciate being called Kamala. Second, I think it's going to be Warnock. Herschel Walker has enough negatives, and there are people who will definitely be bringing everything they can to the field in Georgia to beat him.
Wow. Hey, thank you very much.
He doesn't have it.
I agree with the Shield, because if he comes up and says what's wrong with Herschel, that's where I stand. I think if someone speaks against what he is factually, outside of personal, outside of education, you have to realize what Georgia is. The education, all those things we're talking about in his personal life, doesn't matter to the people they can force to come out to those polls. That's going to be those Trumpsters they're going to force to come to those polls to support
15
Herschel.
seconds, Michael.
Sorry.
Hey, well, listen, 15 seconds.
15 seconds. People are adults. We should not need politicians to tell us why we need to vote for them or to encourage us to vote. We know what our civic responsibility is. If we care about what we want our future to look like, we'll get out there. Period.
Great. Hey, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. You guys, of course, will be back. You've been watching 60 Minutes in Black America. My name is Mike Haney, and I'd like to thank our production team, Jasmine, Jeremiah, Oren, as well, and Kelly, that, tonight, the 9th of November, after Election Day, here we are presenting you a recap. You can go back and watch this on YouTube, so that you can replay what these very astute people have presented to you as their perspective on the elections, and also their view of what will happen in Georgia. Join us this coming Sunday as we have Maxwell Aduzzi from Africa Loom, and we talk about the status of Africa as it relates to America. What is the comparable of Africa to Ukraine, to North Korea, to China, and the agenda of America? This Sunday at 6 p.m. on 60 Minutes in Black America. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Good night. Have a great week.